thank you very much to everybody for tuning into this panel session. As Annie said, it's entitled, Has Anybody Found the Edge Yet? And Are We Looking in the Right Places? So I'm Martin Garner, I'm chairing the panel, and I lead the research that we do at CCS Insight into IoT, and that's obviously one of the big areas of sort of opportunity and potential for edge stuff. Now, I think this is a great topic to discuss, and I'm really looking forward to this and lucky to be joined in this discussion by Joanna Newman, who's Global Edge Computing and 5G Principal Manager at Vodafone. And I hope I don't need to introduce Vodafone to you. Joined by Viraj Abhayawardhana, who's Principal of Network Strategy at BT. And I hope I don't need to introduce BT. Joined by Ken Gold, who's Director of Solution Strategy at EXFO. Now, not everybody might know EXFO. It's a test and measurement company that does an awful lot with service assurance for telcos, so very relevant for edge computing. And by Danon, who's Managing Director of Eurofiber's Cloud Infrastructure Division. And Eurofiber provides open cloud infrastructure for enterprises and verticals and IoT experts. So a really good, broad panel with a wide range of views. Rather than have a big round of introductions, may I assume that all of their bios are on the site and that all of these people are here because they're extremely knowledgeable in the area. And so really it will be best if we get stuck straight into the discussion and hear what they have to say. And in sort of setting that up, please remember for everybody who's listening, that this panel is for you. We don't often get a chance to talk to these people in person and put questions to them. So we'd love to take your questions as part of this. Please put those in the Q&A box and we'll get to them as soon as we can and deal with as many as we can. And I'm sure there will be a good lot of those. So let's get started then on the panel itself. And let's try to bring the edge to life a bit. Now, I've joined in with lots of this kind of panel in the past, and typically you spend half the time on a long, fairly abstract discussion about what is the edge, and nobody agrees. In fact, I happen to know that Daniel has 7 definitions up his sleeve, and I think it's probably not going to be clever to walk through all 7 of those and then discuss them in detail and so on. I think it's going to be much better, if that's all right, if we could just hear how people think about the edge and, what are the things that make it edge or not, and perhaps bring to life some real examples within that. And I happen to know, Joanna, you have a few examples sort of readily available and working on the network. Could you maybe kick us off, and then I'll ask the others in turn afterwards?
Sure. Thank you, Martin, and thank you for inviting me to join in today. I'm really looking forward to this. So to a Vodafone or a wider operator perspective, edge is simply bringing compute closer to where the customer needs it. So instead of going into the middle of the network, which can give very long latency times, it's actually closer to them being more responsive, more consistent, more reliable, higher throughput, etc. So to us, that's really what the edge accomplishes. Now, we have a number of different pilots and active use cases operating on all of the different locations of edge around the world today. It can be edge computing that's supporting a factory, doing visual inspection as things come off of a factory line. It could be distributed edge, which is a geographical capability, which is supporting stadiums with analytics and IoT sensors in it to track how hard the ball is kicked or the speed of rotation or the angle, etc., so that athletes can train more effectively. So there's a lot of different use cases that are operating. I'm really excited about this field because it's emerging over time. Every week there are more and more use cases, more practical elements associated with it. Thanks.
No, thank you. And we'll definitely pick that up because we're in the early stages, and where it's going next is a really big question. But Viraj, perhaps I could ask from a BT point of view, how do you guys see, how do you think about it? And have you got a few examples, please?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for inviting me, Martin. So from our perspective, we see edge as varied. So, and as Joanna said, it's where we can deliver the compute and applications to a customer to meet their requirements. For example, we are doing a lot of things with on-prem, so along with private networks. So as an example, we are innovating a lot with Belfast Harbour, one of the big private network projects we are doing. So we're doing, ranging from CCTV to IoT, environmental monitoring, etc. But in a way, telcos have been using edge all along. So CDN is a classic example where we deal with the content from deep inside the network rather than the where it is originally generated from. Looking further, let's say, so edge could be, there are a number of use cases where we could push the edge even further to effectively deploy some network workloads such as CRAN, as well as other user applications. So for us, it's a kind of broad spectrum ranging from on-prem to the network core sites. Thank you.
Okay, and all about pushing responsiveness and computing closer to the customers and where they are to make it as immediate as possible. Yeah, okay.
Yes,
good.
Exactly.
So, Daniel, a slightly different type of service provider. Could you maybe share your views about how you think about it, please?
Yes, and even though we're not going to go into the wonderful debate of the 6, 7, 8, whatever definitions, Joanna was laughing about it in the previous conversation as well. The fact is, for us as a infrastructure provider, we really want to enable whatever edge is out there. So if Viraj was talking about on-prem, we're starting to think, wait a minute, is the edge actually the devices people are using themselves? And for us as an infrastructure provider, we realize that making available, let it be locations, let it be power, let it be cooling, and making sure that it's connected with fiber or high bandwidth, low latency connectivity, like 5G could be. All in all, every edge definition does require those components of where does the compute run, how standardized is it, can we indeed reduce latency and improve reliability? Because a lot of the times we forget that reliability is also about redundancy, and sometimes it can be redundancy in cooling, it can be redundancy in power, it can be redundancy in compute flexibility. So I think all of the use cases and all of the different ways we talk about edge, at the end of the day, have to be on a reliable network, otherwise they disappear, and have to be on a network and a set of components that is flexible and standardized. Otherwise, you end up having a full edge for one type and then having to roll out almost on top of it another edge for another use cases. So standardization and open infrastructure is something that I think is going to be enabling those very exciting use cases, but at scale. And that's really what I'm looking to be a big part of.
And we'll pick up some of those technical factors and challenges in just a moment. That's really interesting. Just before we go there, though, could I ask Ken? So you Ken, have a rather different perspective on this, and you probably see across your customers a bigger variety of use cases than perhaps anybody.
Sure.
And I wondered, how do you think about it? What for you makes it really about the edge, and where's the highest interest from your point of view?
Yeah. So from my perspective, the edge it's not a place anymore. It really becomes a definition of the service, and so every service, in fact, may have a different edge location. If you think about a customer that has voice services and a customer that may have data services and then may have low latency services and may have video services, their edge is actually going to be in different places depending on the needs of that service. And so for me, the edge was always the very first place that the network added intelligence to the service. So whether that was computing, whether that was routing, whether that was transforming the signals, compressing the signals, whatever that is, it doesn't matter. But it's wherever the network first adds intelligence or does something to the service. To me, that's where the edge is, and the thing that's really interesting about it is as I said, it's a very dynamic game, and in fact, the edge may even move for a service. For example, if it's a particular service that's not necessarily a very high priority service, it may be sitting closer to the customer edge, but at some point they may push the CNFs that are running that service deeper into the network because they're not necessary in a MEC location, but they may need to free up resources in the MEC location for something else. So the edges may move dynamically through the network as it happens. Not just because of mobility, but just because of the changes of service dynamics. So
and traffic loading and various other parameters.
Correct.
Things that are going on as we live our lives.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it's a dynamic place where the network first touches the service and does something with it.
A very interesting perspective. Just in sort of looking ahead slightly, we've heard of a few use cases. Joanna mentioned a few. Viraj had a few. What do you think over the coming sort of 3 to 5 years, where are going to be the main pushes that edge is really needed or really adds value, and importantly, people are prepared to pay for? I don't know how much we charge for edge, but let's talk about that later. Let's start with that. So Viraj, you started from a point of view of being really big on CDNs, but many other things as well, lots of innovation. What do you think are going to be the primary applications driving it over, say, 3 to 5 years?
So what's here and now is a lot of private networks. So we can see the edge on-prem delivering quite a different experience and service requirements. In future, so CDN is one obvious candidate, but as and when the content gets higher and more usage, and we see a lot of transitioning away from digital terrestrial TV, so that's going to drive a lot of demand on the content being closer to the customer. So that's the second most obvious one. Third one, I would say, is there are certain network evolution paths where we would, when the operator moves to Open RAN and vRAN, that's also could be one of the key candidates. But when you talk about like end user applications, I do have a point of view. So in other words, edge is likely to be a premium service, not all cases, but in most of the cases, if you think of AR, VR, you could do a lot with the existing cloud infrastructure. So to put it on edge, there is a premium that might be associated with it. So therefore, that has to be justified in terms of what else does the service deliver. So it's not just purely the fact that it's closer. So it has to be wrapped around with something more than just taking a bit of latency off. So in other words, it has to be more secure. So therefore, what I see, the use cases that are really going to thrive on edge are those that we can deliver some additional requirements, such as offering better data sovereignty, privacy, and availability. So where those are material, that's when the edge can really change the picture.
Okay, and that points much more towards industrial and enterprise use cases, doesn't it, than towards consumers. We hear a lot about VR as transformative with the edge. VR market is extremely small at the moment, isn't it?
Exactly.
We need to be a little careful of that.
Yeah, exactly. So you're quite right. So it's more along the enterprise use cases when it's adapted to enterprise that makes a difference.
Okay. I mean, does everybody agree with this? Joanna, do you agree, or do you have a few other use cases up your sleeve that might be driving it over 5 years?
So we're really focusing on the enterprise segment first, with consumer to follow. That's normally how it happens with these large technology shifts that are occurring. And we see a lot of opportunities that are really unlocked by putting edge and IoT together. So absolutely, I completely agree with Viraj around private networks. And I agree with your view, Martin, regarding the VR space is very small. But actually things like visual inspection are quite important. Augmented reality. we're also seeing a lot of demand from public service providers. So governments and large agencies around critical national infrastructure that are also looking to use edge capabilities, because not only do they provide a lower latency, by definition, that's more secure as well. And then lastly, the data privacy element is very important for some customers as well. And with that being processed on your premises, you have control as to what happens with that data, which is very reassuring for some segments of businesses. The other area that we think is really important in growing is healthcare. So using edge and IoT and AI together to be able to detect when somebody's fallen out of bed or when somebody's supposed to move and they haven't. So there's a lot of really interesting use cases and trials underway in the healthcare segment as well. I think those will actualize themselves over the next 3 to 5 years. Thanks.
And just to pick up on that, there were a few there which can come together, particularly running a mobile, also many mobile networks as you do. So things like big incidents where the emergency services and healthcare, are all involved, but you don't know where it's going to be. And do you see that sort of critical incident type of use case? It's a bit specialist, but it really matters when it happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are already techniques that are available for emergency services for critical national incidents. And hilariously, my husband is a critical national incident manager, so I know about this topic. So there are a great number of tools available for them, but absolutely there are things that can be done in a better way, in a clearer way. I wouldn't say it's on my top 20 list of use cases that are that people are clamoring for, but it's an interesting one to consider. I think as well, we see edge developing in lots of different ways. So we've talked about on-prem, so a factory, for example, but there's also on-prem on an oil rig or a boat. There's also on-prem in a small, in like a campus of a network of buildings together. There's lots of different ways where each of those types of implementations are spawning their own use cases as well, all of which will bring to life opportunities in the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, that's interesting. And it sounds as though, from the way you're both speaking about it, as though once we have some sort of edge facilities available, it may be that other use cases get lit up on that same infrastructure. Daniel, can I bring you in? Do you see those the same sort of approach, or do you have a different view?
No, I hear it all, and as ex Vodafone, I remember also the passion in terms of the bringing that innovation across, as I saw competing with BT in the past as well. The fact is, I remember looking for that killer app when we developed 3G, which I was a basic engineer for. And this look for the killer app, you always get surprised. You'll get surprised that that combination of use cases is actually going to be what works. As you just described, potentially it starts from there. What I think is very interesting is something that Viraj brought up, which is Open RAN, for example. This is an actual change within the industry, the telecommunication industry, to say we can actually use these things that we're thinking about in a very financially effective way. And let's not forget, that really is going to drive where the edge comes in. The other thing is we're talking on-prem. And we forget, this is the cyclicality of everything in life. As an engineer, I already see that, but the cyclicality saying we need to get everything off-prem and now we need to put it back on-prem. We have to remember why we took it off-prem. That site on a boat is not going to be secure, redundant, and proper. So again, it's about making sure that the use case, all these use cases, have a place to live, to develop, have an infrastructure that's there, have an ecosystem where it's not just a telco working on this, but really more players at it. And then, to a certain extent, let life make it work. And what do we need to bring components for that? We need to bring that monitoring, reliability, visibility, control, but we also need to bring that ecosystem of partners around the table, and we need to use it ourselves.
Yeah, eating your own dog food, so to speak, in that sense.
Drinking your own champagne.
No, that's a much nicer way. Thank you, Joanna.
Who likes to eat dog food?
I must say I like the fact that the service providers came up with some very interesting services, and
Yes.
our infrastructure provider came up with a very interesting infrastructure facility availability play, and that's the perspective we're looking for. So I'm going to take the other perspective. Then I'm going to come in with the assurance provider, and I'm going to say that to me, it's the drivers are the use cases are unknown. I mean, there's some obvious ones that people have talked about, but like Daniel just said, as soon as you make it, as soon as you put it out there, as soon as you provide that capability to innovate, people are going to innovate, and the innovations will come in places that we can't even begin to expect yet. So what you need to provide on these edges are the facilities to allow people to innovate and innovate securely and safely. And one of the biggest challenges that people are going to have to innovate is understanding that when they do deploy that service service works, and they can understand how that service is working, and they can manage the quality of experience so that the customers, ultimately the end customer, is delivered the service they want, and the carrier understands that they can deliver that service confidently, and they don't have to worry about risking their business by offering a new service that fails miserably. They can see it, they can scale it properly, and so to me that's what it comes down to at the edge. And you kind of mentioned that it's primarily enterprise, and it is going to be primarily enterprise because that's where the money obviously comes from. You look at we did some surveys that said like something like 68% of all services will be SLA driven in the coming 5G world. But the bottom line is too that there's a large gaming community out there who are not enterprise, and the gaming community absolutely needs a 5G network, or quite frankly, they're going to need a 6G network eventually. But they need a 5G network to run games properly and to use it. And if you're going to be successful in being a gaming provider, or access to gaming, you're going to have to be able to manage the edge very well, because that's where the game is going to either happen or not happen. So I think there's some very interesting use cases. Most of it we don't even know what they are yet. So,
well, that's a really good perspective, and you touched on some of the technical issues there, and I'd just like to go into that just a little bit deeper. And I want to pick up Viraj's point about CDNs as a service, an edge service that we have been providing for really quite a long time, and we quite understand that quite well. But what I wondered was, with the edge applications that we're thinking about, maybe the traffic flows are going to be very different. And I wondered, is the CDN architecture a suitable starting point, or do we have to kind of rethink some bits about that? And then do their telcos have the service providers, do they have what they need? How do you test and assure all of this stuff? We quickly have quite a lot of questions. Will the billing systems cope is often quite a big question. And are there new security issues? And what about things like automatic failover? It's a very long shopping list of questions. I'm just going to ask Viraj to start on that one, if I may. And you don't have to answer all those questions, but any that you can would be great.
We are moving from a 4G core network to a 5G core network, and while we are doing that, we're also doing two things. One is we are putting in our own cloud native platform to run the core network, as well as we are actually distributing the user plane. So we are putting that across a number of sites in UK, and it coincides with the same sites that we have CDN. So therefore, now in future we will have a common CDN framework for fixed and mobile, and that's a key advantage for us. We talk a lot about putting the edge in different locations, but in reality, you cannot take fiber coming out of base station and connect to edge, because the radio network needs to be turned into something that is legible for IP. So because you still have to have what's called a user plane function, and that's what we do today. So therefore, the 5G core will turn that mobile signal into user plane and into IP, which then can be connected to edge services. So therefore, the places are the same as CDN from that perspective. Or would we use the same infrastructure to deploy edge? We could, but there's also in parallel the cloud platform that we are building. We are finding actually that is a real a flexible architecture we are building. So, for example, we started off doing 5G core. Now we are finding, it could work for broadband, it could work for Wi-Fi, and so on. Okay. So there are a large number of internal candidates we are already thinking about. And then you could think how that can be, extended to external applications. So yes, everything is falling into place, and I'm sure that's not going to work for all types of use cases, but certain use cases, such as, let's say, VCDNs, maybe key critical services such as surveillance, security, those things could also be hosted on the same platform.
Okay, that's good. Clear answer. Daniel, any perspectives on that side of things?
Well, I think CDN was also about eyeball. How close are you to how many? And that again goes to what is the use case. Sometimes the edge is about the single eyeball that we need to be able to deliver for, or it can be significantly more. And that's also where I was talking about cyclicality, but you can also see it as a physical movement. But there are some applications that, for example, gaming, that went from the on-prem to the cloud and now is going to get closer. And that's where there's within that spectrum, suddenly it hits where the CDN strategy really fits. The strategy of buffering or selecting what you're putting there. So it's also about at what point in that movement is it at a particular point in time. And I think Ken absolutely right. As a gaming user, I've stopped trying to upgrade my PCs or Macs or whatever, and I'm already I'm desperate about that. Not just the latency, but the jitter being low. And the fact is, the current CDN platforms have been built knowing where they were between them and the user, knowing what variability of that infrastructure was there. It's a consumer broadband infrastructure that's between the CDN user, and it becomes also a mobile one. So it really will be needed to be adapted, and that's why standards are also going to be very, very important. Knowing, okay, this is how you're going to monitor and manage something that is for 10 to 15 users versus for 1,000, things that can be over Wi-Fi, mobile, etc. So I think we will also invent that orchestration layer that will have to be tailored to business, consumer, large scale, private. We just need to know that space is out there and be ready for it, and make sure that what we put out there from all of our angles has thought about enabling it, not limiting it, but enabling it.
Okay, that's clear. I like the idea that we need a new orchestration layer that can handle the dynamic nature of it and the complexity that we're going now into. But excuse me, Joanna, let me ask: do you agree with those things? And do you have any other perspectives on, say, things like the billing and the security angles, which we haven't sort of picked up in any detail yet, or how you do some of the more complex things, even like automatic failover that, say, a factory might really need?
Sure, these are all great questions. So the Vodafone approach has been to partner with trusted members of the industry. So instead of Vodafone building our own edge cloud in some geographies, we have chosen to partner with hyperscalers who already have the trust of customers for their security and their failover capabilities that are in play. Now, that means that we're providing a platform approach, which enables customers to have a play, like you can go on the AWS console and just have a play, and really enable that potential innovation that Daniel and Ken were talking about when a platform is made available to anybody who wants to use it, and really allow those cases to be spawned bottom up as opposed to top down. Now, not everything is available by this approach. So there are other further evolutions that need to happen in our network and in our security layer. But for the moment, the way we've chosen to handle those problems regarding billing and security is trusted partners.
Right. Okay. That's a good. And the ecosystem, the need to work with a bunch of other people who can serve specific industries, but also for innovation. That's coming out, I think, as a really strong message from this. I think everybody agrees that is a key aspect of the way forwards here.
Yes, and if I just speak about our Edge Innovation Program for a moment. So we've been running an Edge Innovation Program for about 18 months now. That's open to anybody that wants to join, where we and
it looks as though Joanna has got a technical glitch there. Just while we're waiting for Joanna to come back, let me ask Ken then. We're going into a much more dynamic and complex world. Do the telcos have the tools and the testing that they need to allow all of this? Sorry, Joanna, we had a glitch from you there. We couldn't see, but so I was just moving on to Ken to ask if the telcos have the tools and the things they need to enable this sort of dynamic, more complex setup that we're going into. How do you see that? Are there any bits that we need that we don't have yet?
Yeah, I think the answer is mixed. Okay, so that we have the basic tools, we have the basic understanding. We know that AI has to take over much of the operation of the network. We know that machine learning is critical. We know that we need orchestrators to orchestrate just about everything under the sun now, because the network is becoming too complicated and the services will change too fast, and you're going to be scaling horizontally too quickly and massively scaling vertically, and all these sorts of ideas. It's very true. And so we know that, but obviously they're not all there yet. We did a survey of of operators earlier this year in conjunction with Heavy Reading, and fully about 74% of them said that they are worried about managing 5G, like doing fault resolution within 5G, because they don't have the tools that allow them to correlate infrastructure to quality of service. So that's a big challenge for them. So for me, I think the technical aspects of the edge that need to be done is exactly that. It's that ability to be able to instrument every single service, and then be able to see the quality of experience and the quality of experience degradations. But you can't monitor everything all the time. There's too much data. There's one North American tier 1 operator told us 40 petabytes of data per hour of monitoring data, what they're expecting. So you can't deal with that, obviously, as a centralized system. So you have to push everything up to the edge. You have to be able to do anomaly detection at the edge. You have to be able to properly contextualize all the information so that as it's brought back into the central processing areas, you're only getting anomalous data. You're not getting all the data that says everything's running fine. And then now you can correlate that, but you can also correlate it in a way that you should be able to correlate the observability infrastructure and the quality of service, quality of experience metrics as well, so that you have essentially a single pane of glass for both your IT ops and your network ops, service ops people to use. And it gives them the ability now to find root cause analysis very quickly and move on. And until you get to that, your edge services will never explode, because nobody will want to essentially bet the farm on these new services if they're not sure they can be managed.
Well, exactly. And I think what you just highlighted is really important, but especially if we are at all successful in enabling the ecosystem to innovate, suddenly those demands are going to come on very quickly indeed.
Exactly.
And we actually we have a nice question from the audience they've managed to sum up what we've just been talking about for about 10 minutes in one question, which is in one line, which is, how do you manage and orchestrate the 5G slicing issue? Now, obviously, 5G slicing is quite a big subject, but would anybody like to jump in? Joanna's nodding. Let me start with Joanna, if I may. How do you think about that? How do you tackle it?
So Vodafone's spending a lot of time looking at what are the actual requirements from customers to be able to support slicing, and working with our customers and our partners to see how we can support them. Ultimately, slicing is is a segregated resource that's allocated or shared amongst a few customers or dedicated to a customer. And there are some immediate use cases where that becomes practical. So we talked earlier about emergency services in the event of a critical national incident. And of course, that's already in place and already in the standard. So the approach that we're taking is to really understand what the requirements are. If you speak to a customer, they'll say, oh, I want 100 megs, dedicated to me whenever I need it. And that's achievable in an MPN scenario, but not necessarily on a network scenario. So it's about understanding what those requirements are and how you can provide them. We're also looking at the whole stack for how we would orchestrate and assure. So it's a developing story from the Vodafone side, but we understand the need, we're seeing it from customers, and we're running small trials across our whole estate. Thanks.
Sure. No, thank you. And Viraj, you've got your hand up there with, I can imagine you've got lots of perspectives on this too.
Indeed. So in a way, we are kind of forgetting that Edge is just one enabler. So when you look at the end-to-end service, Edge provides certain benefits, and then on top of that, slicing is yet another enabler. So as Joanna said, it provides you more guarantee of the service, more availability of the service. And not only that, so there are a number of other things also have to come into account. So let's take an example. Let's take connected cars, right? So to deploy a connected car seriously on a like a 5G network, you need some features enabled in the radio network. They are called URLLC features. These are going to have to be rolled out onto the network so that it's more responsive. So when the car needs a connectivity or information, that gets priority. Then it has to be aggregated on a separate resource pool. So that's the slicing angle of it. Then on the transport from the base station to the network, then you can again prioritize the traffic to give a priority over the other traffic, and so on. And fourthly, even the core can be sliced in a way such that it is optimized to serve that particular use case. So slicing will play a role, Edge will play a role, and it all becomes about what the use case you're trying to solve and what the service requirements are. So yes, so that's my answer in summary. So we should always think that Edge is an enabler. It's an exciting enabler, but at the same time, there are a lot of other things that also need to be coming into the from a telco perspective that we need to be deploying.
Yeah, and that just underlines how, as we move to 5G, the number of sort of layers and the complexity we're dealing with there's a lot to get straight, isn't there, in order to provide good services there. Perhaps we could move on and just talk a little bit about how going to market with Edge. And I know various people have made a start on this, but even though it's still sort of early days, I was hoping to get a little bit of discussion on, key segments to address, which is obviously tied to the use cases we've talked about. How do you work with the ecosystem and partners that we've talked about? What about the cloud players and so on? There's quite a lot in there. Viraj, just while you're sat there on the screen, anything you want to say about how BT is tackling this and how you're going about it?
So yes, certainly. So we see monetization on the Edge in three ways. And we see, partnership is critical to that. So the first and the foremost is the most simplest is a what's called a colo model, where we partner with someone like a hyperscaler, and they would deploy all their the whole rack of equipment as well as the services as well as a platform, and we provide space and power. So that's one model. The second model is, as I described before. So there are certain use cases where it warrants or it may be justified to put it on a telco cloud. So the things that we are building that could be running some specialist services such as VCDNs, etc. Thirdly is a full end-to-end service that we are thinking of. So that could be in the form of a BT cloud and a BT application deployed or in partnership with a key supplier. I don't know, those could be examples such as surveillance and one critical services for like government and MOD, things like that. So I think in summary, there are about three different models broadly that we are thinking about. And of course, when I talk about partners, that's also quite a big spectrum. So ranging from one end to a hyperscaler down to open cloud providers. We already announced the work that we're doing with Quilt, and even towards the more specialist system integrators and application providers as well.
Yeah, and there are a lot of those, aren't there, as well? So, Daniel, if I could bring you in here, you've already talked about the openness requirement and the need to engage with a large number of different sectors. And of course, that implies lots of other different players involved in the ecosystem. How are you tackling that ecosystem?
So, because we want to build once and get as many people using it, that logic also says, when I'm talking about the segments we're working on, I always say it's not just enterprises or IT players, it's also verticals. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, one of the big opportunities is to think about a particular industry, a particular group of organizations that have very similar needs. So, for example, there was maybe 4 years where anybody would talk about smart cities before they even talked about edge or anything or 5G. They just talked about smart cities. Well, cities are in themselves a very big set of users that really have common elements. So you can really build and apply to many. But what's really interesting when we're looking at verticals like in the Netherlands, the city managers are very powerful, but also hospital groups can be very important, or even in the agro business. What we see is that they have common partners. They have common applications. They have common uses. It's not just setting it up for each one, but it's actually connecting them and allowing them all to be working together much better. And that's where we have found, let's say, an edge case in the fact that to help a city connect both to its devices, its different sensors everywhere in the city, and to its more cloud partners, which sometimes are hyperscalers that are really big players and very useful in those industries, but actually bringing them together, connecting them, and allowing them to use that common architecture, common platform that, let's also not forget the fiber that's out there needs to connect all of that. Not everything can be done with Wi-Fi, with wireless, with 5G and other technologies. So the verticals that we've seen are government, local governments, hospitals, but also industrial verticals. And it's not just enabling them; it's enabling them as a group.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And Ken, so your perspective will be, I'm guessing, slightly not substantially different, but a different angle on it.
A different angle. Yeah. No, I think I agree with what everybody said. But I'm actually going to take the previous question and this question sort of together and view it from the perspective of the infrastructure itself, and slicing and enabling sharing at the edge and enabling multi-tenanting within these edge locations. It's all one thing to say that I've dedicated a network slice to this particular feature, or I've set up the traffic policing such that everybody has a fair share of the bandwidth. But at the end of the day, you're still sharing a piece of hardware. I mean, these slices all run on a common piece of infrastructure, and if the infrastructure is misbehaving, or if somebody's service within a multi-tenanted MEC location is not behaving properly and it's consuming too much CPU, if it's consuming too much memory than it should be, or all these things. These are the things that will really become problematic for carriers if they've got a guaranteed network slice up for somebody and they don't understand why latency has increased because there's a noisy neighbor CPU within a server somewhere that's bothering something and it's causing packet loss or something. Like these things happen, and until you can relate them up and down across the stack, you're going to have issues. So I think the big thing that really has to happen here is, as these new services become available and exciting new things, it comes back to being able to deploy them with the confidence you need to do that properly, and
that's coming through.
Really understand.
Loud and clear. Thank you for that. And we're just starting to time out, actually. And so I'm going to give the last answer on this one to Joanna, if I may, because I know you've already done the sort of laboratories where you invite people in to try and work on these things together. But if if I run a company that wants to join with Vodafone and become a partner in all of this, what do I do? How do I engage with you? And how are you making that work, in practical terms, as much as technical terms?
I don't see Joanna in...
I think we've lost her.
We've lost Joanna. Oh, well, I can't.
Her.
What a shame. It's because Vodafone is doing some quite interesting stuff in that
Well,
area.
I know. I'm sorry. I don't know whether what happened to her link or something. I don't know, but...
Oh, she's coming back.
Oh.
Yes. One thing I would add in that is to say that it's those trusted partners, that ecosystem has to be full of experts. And they have to be, Ken was talking about CPU overlapping or interfering with something else. The fact is, we can't all become great at everything. And somebody's going to have to be the right one to manage the CPUs, the right ones to manage the location and the physical security of it, the right one to manage the interface with applications. And that's really where we're looking to get all of the industry, all of the elements of the ecosystem to understand it well enough that they can become a trusted partner in that edge world.
Okay, and that's a really good point. Let me, if Joanna is back, let me give her the last answer on this. And so we were on the ecosystem play, Joanna, and the question was about how, in practical terms, are you and other telcos sort of engaging? There's an awful lot of potential partners we need to engage with. How are you going about that? You mentioned the sort of laboratory where people can come and plug in and try things, but it's bigger than that, isn't it? How are you doing that?
Oh, thank you, and apologies for my technical breakdown. So the Vodafone approach is to sponsor innovation, but through an edge innovation program, which anybody can come and join, as I said, from which is a lab all the way up to a full trial and then into live. And why we've taken that approach is to help the ecosystem find its own partners to support the use case. Mm-hmm. So we don't necessarily need to be a matching service, but we can very happily say to somebody, oh, you're looking at an XR, VR use case. And actually, we've worked with those people in a different use case for this. Maybe you should make an introduction. And these won't necessarily be services that Vodafone hold. We're doing this really to drive innovation in the wider ecosystem. Now, for services that we do offer, then of course there's the opportunity for us to partner with them to do that, or as a SaaS service, build or buy, et cetera, et cetera. But the approach that we're taking is that there's so much innovation that's happening that it's just impossible to know what everybody is doing and how everybody is progressing, and therefore to help people come along and build those use cases and prove end-to-end capabilities.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. And I think, first of all, that's a very nice place to draw this discussion to a close. Secondly, we have actually timed out, and so I do need to wrap it up. So let me say, we're going clearly into quite a complex field, which is going to need a lot of help from a lot of people and a lot of sort of assurance and orchestration to bring it all together and make it work properly. I'm not going to attempt to wrap it up more than that. Just let me say thank you very much to all of our panelists. Really interesting discussion. I have a feeling there's quite a lot more to come here. Secondly, thank you to the audience. We had a couple of very interesting questions come through. And thirdly, thank you to Annie and Mobile Europe for hosting us here this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.
It was all our pleasure. Thank you very much, all of you. Great input.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.